Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Anthropuzzled podcast. I'm your host, Abby Letzinger, and every 2 weeks, we'll explore how anthropologists are forging unique career paths beyond the usual academic sphere. Tune in, get inspired, and start piecing together your own career puzzle within the world of anthropology. On today's episode, we're thrilled to have Savannah Mandel with us, an outer space anthropologist and fifth-year PhD student at Virginia Tech. Her research focuses on the intriguing history and legalization of asteroid mining, a field that sits at the crossroads of science and ethics. In addition to her academic work, Savannah is also an accomplished author, having just released her compelling book, Ground Control, An Argument for the End of Human Space Exploration. How are you doing today, Savannah?
I'm doing great. I just woke up. I'm just cute.
Same.
Yeah.
We'll just hop right into it. What exactly is an outer space anthropologist and why are they important?
Outer space anthropologist, anthropologist who researches space. It's really just a subfield of anthropology, but it can be a subfield of any subfield of anthropology. So, for example, if folks don't know, anthropology is broken into 4 primary subfields. So you have linguistics, archaeology, biological anthropology, and then you have cultural or social anthropology. And so you can have someone who researches space as an anthropologist from any of those 4 fields. So I know multiple biological anthropologists who research space, and it's their focus area. And I also know multiple social anthropologists. And now there's archaeologists who are focusing their work on like space debris, which is some really cool space anthropology work. But I think that term, space anthropology, came out of media hype that was happening and developed its own name. But it's a subfield. It's a subfield within our field.
Okay. So what does a day in your life look like? Because I saw you had posted on Instagram the other day you were going through the NASA archives. Does that happen a lot?
I will say, I feel like I do spacey work all the time still. And even when I'm not doing field work, I myself am getting sucked into space-related things a fair bit. For right now, I am working out actively on a research project. So for me, what my work looks like as a space anthropologist studying asteroid mining, the project itself is partially archival and based on literature, and it is based a little bit on ethnography, just a smaller ethnography than what an anthropologist would traditionally do. But so I am interviewing asteroid miners. So there are asteroid mining companies, and I'm talking to them. I'm not physically going out to their locations, but at one point, I did that. I, like any anthropologist would do if they were conducting field work, would go out to sites where space research or, space science work was being conducted or space technologies were being developed, would go out there and do participant observation. I'm doing some consulting work for space companies a little bit. And I was just in, like you said, the NASA archives. And that was me, an anthropologist, just doing archival work, trying to learn, what cultural data and political data, economic data can I glean from archival information, specifically on the topic of space mining. And I was looking at material specifically from 1950 through the modern era. A lot of what I ended up looking at ended up being from the 1980s and 90s, which was really weird. But so my work looks like what a traditional anthropologist's work would look like. It just tends to happen in highly technical environments.
Okay. And for those who might not know, could you define what ethnography is?
Sure, yeah. So ethnography is a practice of field work that anthropologists do where we go out to a field site. So it's a place where a culture or population is located, and we spend an extended period of time there typically. You can have smaller form ethnographies, but traditionally, so you spend a long period of time there. You go out to this location. Say you want to study, a population that's located in the middle of the Amazon jungle. You go there and you live with these people typically for a year, and you eat what they eat, you do what they do, you hang out in the way they hang out. You learn the languages they know. You try to immerse yourself as intensely as you can in that culture. You're taking as many notes on what you're seeing as possible. And the point of doing that is to be able to understand their beliefs and values and practices and rituals and motivations for their activities. So when I do that in a technical operation, like a spaceport, I'm doing the same thing. When I was at Spaceport America, I was doing what they did and going to work with them, right? I was going out to the spaceport. I was going to White Sands Missile Range. I was going to their barbecues. I was going to their happy hours. I was sitting in on a lot of their meetings. Some of their meetings I wasn't allowed to because they were like, under an NDA. But like I was riding in the car with them, even if we were just going to like, oh, the internet's down. Come on, Savannah, get in the car. Like I would just go with them because that's what we were doing today. If I wasn't allowed to hang out with them because something under NDA was happening, typically I would go hang out with the firefighters and EMT that were out there because Spaceport America had their own emergency services system because they're like a huge, because spaceship and light on fire, easy, right? And they would be bored all the time. And so I would go hang out with them and ask them about the spaceport and like stuff that was going on. And they would show me all sorts of stuff and let me ride in the fire truck. And I mean, that was ethnography too, because you're learning about a whole nother side of the spaceport. And it was really fun. And, they'd be like, yeah, one time this rattlesnake got into the office and like, we had to go get it out. And like one time this endangered species of owl got in the spaceport and like learning about, which if you think about it, these are like really interesting ethnographic moments of the environment, like interacting with this technoscape. And it was really cool. It was some of my favorite parts. Sometimes I'm like, I want to go back and just do an ethnography of the emergency services folks out there because they're in their own little world and they're so cool. But
yeah, and generally with ethnographic work, it's mainly qualitative data over quantitative data.
Yeah.
So then the anthropologist is trying to make, how can I make this into a paper or research be important? Because it's a lot harder to do that with just qualitative work than it is quantitative. Anyways, so how did you choose to get into space anthropology with it being a niche field? What experiences or volunteer work or education did you have to get into that?
Yeah, I would say in a way, I was going to say I got lucky, but honestly, there was a fair bit of self-drive there because when I was younger, I was really into sci-fi and I did have a huge love of space. And when it came time, I was in undergraduate at University of Florida and I was talking to a professor about graduate school. And she was like, when you think about graduate school, you need to think about what you want to study and who you might want to work with. And she was asking me, she's like, what do you want to study? And I was like, well, I like these things. And one of those things I mentioned to her was space. And she's like, I just don't think that's possible. I don't think it's physically possible to research space. And, to give her credit, one, she was a Mesopotamian archaeologist, but also, at the time that I was talking to her, it would have been around 2016, 2015. And a lot of the space anthropology work was really just starting out and was not as well known. So I think that most people weren't aware of its existence. And then I ended up going to UCL in London. And by happenstance, I was talking to a professor about struggling to figure out what I wanted to do my master's degree research project on. And I said to him kind of casually, I was like, I just wish I could research space. Wouldn't that be so cool? And he was like, you can. I research space. And his name's Aaron Parkhurst. And it turned out that there were 3 professors at UCL who were researching outer space. And they would go on to get a very well-funded grant to create this program called the Ethno-ISS program that would focus on anthropologists working directly with the ISS and other space programs. And Aaron's work was on sort of the human body and embodiment and kind of sexuality, reproduction in outer space. And he was like, yeah, you can research outer space. Here are these other anthropologists who have started to do it. He showed me Valerie Olson's work and Janet Vertessi's work. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's this. How do I do it? And so they helped me. They showed me the literature that did exist, this small body of work. And they're like, this is other folks who have done it. To do it, you need to send emails. They're like, make a list, email NASA, email space programs, email commercial space sites. David Valentine literally just went to conferences to do his field work. You could do that. And that's what I did. I just was really persistent and I sat down and I probably sent out 300 or 400 emails to all sorts of places. I mean, it was interesting. I started off, I went on to the NASA, there's a way to find a list of all NASA active missions. And then you can find the PIs for those missions. And PIs have to have their email addresses listed. because of federal funding, right? And so I found the email, emailed them, and I was like, can I come watch you? Like, I'm an anthropologist. And I did that too with commercial space organizations and just emailed a ton of them. And the responses I got were really interesting. You know, some of the places were just like, a lot of people didn't respond, right? A fair bit of people were like, you know, what would an anthropologist do out here? Like, that doesn't make sense. Some people were like, we would love to have you out here. That sounds so cool what your work is doing. But like, we have a funding scheme already in place and it wouldn't be legal to have an unfunded person out here, or we can't include you in the funding person. We have to pay people. So like, there was stuff like that stood in the way, especially with federally funded programs. A couple of people were just really skeptical about, like, they didn't understand what an anthropologist did enough to want to have me out there. They're like, we think this is really nifty, but like, we just don't get what you're going to be doing. And I don't think I understood my role enough in a science and tech place to be able to explain it well enough. Nowadays, I feel like I have really good examples of anthropologists who have come out of it with quantitative results. And that helps, I think, when you're talking to people in a STEM space to say, hey, I'm going to do this qualitative research. And then here's examples in the past of anthropologists who have come out of work and had really specific quantitative results, because they think that that helps them. So for example, you have, like, there's this anthropologist who did work with patients at a hemophilia clinic, the blood disease, and he studied the folks with the blood disease to understand why they weren't taking their medicine properly. And then from studying them, was able to give advice on like how to make sure they take their medicine, you know, on time, how to better store the medicine. They developed a new technology for the storage. And so you're able to like say, here's an example of an anthropologist working in an organized space, you know, producing a new technology, basically. Yeah, but I didn't have examples of that at the time. But anyway, so that's how I got my field site. Sent a lot of emails. Eventually, actually, the Commercial Spaceflight Federation was like, this is really cool. I love anthropology. Like, one person really knew what anthropology was. And she was like, I love anthropology, and I think Space for America would love to have you. Let me connect you. And then I got in contact with Space for America and ended up out there.
Yeah, it's so cool how all these different tiny little moments lead up to like this big thing. Because like, if you had never gone to London, you never would have met this professor who would have been like, I study space, you know, and you might not be as far into what you are now if you didn't have that experience. So I think that's just really cool.
Yeah. I mean, I think about that sometimes. The writing stuff too. Like, if I didn't write, like, the reason why I think I got some of the first speaking events I did was because I wrote those two first blog posts in Cast Talk and in the Platypus and in the Geek Anthropologist. And then people read those and then like, they were like, you should do a speaking event for us. And then from those, I got more speaking opportunities and invitations to write. And like, it just really snowballed. Butterfly effect.
Right. And like, this is a good way to lead into the next topic of, let's talk about your new book that you just released. It's called Ground Control, An Argument for the End of Human Space Exploration. So how did it feel going from, I feel like I really shouldn't talk about this kind of topic because it's kind of controversial, to being like, I'm going to, you know, publish a book on it and be just totally open on what my opinion for this is?
Yeah, well, you know what's interesting is if you read my blog posts in order of publication, you'll see me getting less and less timid about talking about space ethics. So like, I wrote this blog post called Lunar Imperialism and How to Avoid It. And in that one, I'm like, I can't remember what I argue. I basically argue like commercial space exploration is the key to avoiding these ethical issues. And I think I was working in commercial space exploration at the time. And I think I was really trying to say, hey, there's issues, but I was terrified of like losing my job and losing my job opportunities. Like, I was on the job market at the time. And then the next blog post I published, I think I like give into this idea a little bit more. And like, if you read these small posts, you can see me like evolving, my thought process evolving every year. And it was horrifying. You know, I thought to myself, I was like, this is a huge jump. Like, writing this book is there's no going back from it. I have a line in it that says like, I'm going to lose my LinkedIn network. And it, sure enough, like there's the LinkedIn wars that have happened on some of my posts where you just have these people are creating massive arguments on there. But, you know, I don't regret it at all. And, you know, I wrote this book and I feel like I made the right decision in talking about it. And I felt like the stuff that Ground Control talks about needed to be talked about, and that this conversation about the side effects of human space exploration needed to be discussed, and that everything I saw and that the research showed and that the literature showed and said and that other researchers were saying should be put in this accessible way for the general public in a way that provoked conversation so that way it was talked about. And because, like most of the people in the public, I grew up loving space, and it was my experiences doing research and having access to research that made me start second guessing what was happening. It was sitting in Congress listening to how our representatives in office talked about space. I was being exposed to the people who are in charge of space ventures, commercial and otherwise, and seeing what their goals were for space ventures that made me think like, this does not feel right. Like, this is wrong. Like, there's something not adding up about this. That felt very Orwellian, and it felt weird that no one was talking about it.
Yeah, and I think you did a great job. I actually finished it last night of being able to break it down to where it's understandable, and it's not like most academic papers that you read where you're like, I don't understand one word that's going on. Because like my husband, he's writing his master's thesis on how to use moon dust to actually advance human space exploration. He finally explained it to me the other day, and I'm like, I'm literally talking to a space anthropologist on Friday.
What did he think about you reading the book?
He has mixed feelings about it. I mean, he's like, I understand her point of view. Like, does she want to go to space? I'm like, well, yeah, of course she wants to go to space, but to do so ethically. So we're not leaving everybody behind who can't afford it. So she still wants it to happen. Just, it needs to be done better. And he's like, oh, okay, I can vibe with that. And I'm like, well. But yeah, no, you broke it down so well. Is like, I didn't feel like I had any questions of like, I don't know what this means or whatnot. So for anybody who is interested in space, definitely go read it because it was fantastic. But there's a lot of topics that you kind of brought up in it. Like one of them is the Elysium effect. And the only reason I recognize that word is because I had watched that movie not too long ago. Do you want to explain what the Elysium effect is?
Yeah, part of me was like, should I have even put that in the book? Because I just feel like I should have put it in plain terms. It was originally based on this movie that came out, Elysium. Some of you have probably seen it, but the premise is that there was this amazing, beautiful, glorious like space settlement in the sky that, the rich and wealthy lived on, had all sorts of like crazy technologies like healing pods that could heal someone in a second. But on Earth, there was all these people left behind living in intense poverty. And when I was first learning about space mining, very, very first learning about space mining and also space law, I started thinking about the idea of Elysium and the idea of wealth and the idea of, well, if people mine space, who can mine space legally as of 2015? Anyone can mine space and sell those resources they gain in space. But there's nothing that says anymore that those resources have to be distributed evenly. The full description of this is like, I get into all the effect of the moon agreement, which space miners don't like anymore, but I talk about that in the book. But anyway, so the resources gained in space, they don't have to be distributed on Earth. They could just be sold on a market. So hypothetically, anyone can go out there and get all this wealth that's in the stars, but who has the ability to go up there in the first place? Well, the wealthy have the ability to go up to space in the first place. So are the wealthy just going to get wealthier because they have access to space in the first place? And are the poor going to get left behind on Earth? And when I'm talking to space miners right now, and they have these ideas that are actually very akin to the sci-fi movie where they're like, well, we should use these resources in space, to develop in space. And you almost imagine something like the Elysium station being developed in space because it's a lot less efficient to actually bring those resources back to Earth than it is to develop them in space. And so the Elysium effect just says, is there going to be a huge wealth disparity because the wealthy have access to space and then can get wealthier by mining space, while people on Earth are going to be stuck with the resources on Earth that are slowly dwindling. Yeah. And it's a concerning thing. Even if space mining is something that is far off in the future, this probability is alarming.
So do you feel that we should be focusing more on solving the problems that we have currently than trying to just go straight to plan B of let's just find a way to live in space rather than fixing what's going bad right now?
Yeah, that's kind of the main premise of ground control, is that it argues not that we should never ever send humans to outer space. it argues that we should, as of right now, prioritize some of these issues that are occurring on Earth. The idea in ground control is that we have not run out of time. We don't need to leave Earth right now. We have some time, right? The whole premise of Interstellar is that they've run out of time. And if we put all the money we are putting towards something like space tourism into Earth's environmental issues, climate change management, and other issues like scarcity, then that's a lot of funding we could be putting towards that scientific development and technological development. Let's mention unmanned space exploration. Doesn't mean we have to give up on space exploration. We could focus on unmanned space exploration for a little bit, which is honestly probably better for us, because if we're truly looking for a plan B, right, it's probably not Mars or the moon. So it would be smarter, if we're truly looking for a plan B, to be sending out like more and more probes and things that are going to help us locate this plan B and eventually find a way to go to it. I mean, and that's all ground control is saying. It's saying, for now, let us prioritize these issues on Earth until we reach a point of stability. And also, let's think generationally about it, because one thing that happens a lot is that you see an issue prioritized for one political administration, and then the minute the political administration changes, the scientific issues that could prioritize change. And we almost need, I talk about this, we almost need like a governing body that helps to make sure that whatever we're prioritizing, it goes beyond an administration, but is managed by something that is above administrations, and is also more of like a global governing body when the issue is global, like climate change. Right? Yeah. That's affecting the whole planet. It's not just affecting America or Europe or Russia. And you might be sitting there saying, these are really radical ideas, Savannah. Like, how are you going to accomplish that? But I think that ground control also says this, like, you have to make really radical changes if you want to see radical changes. Like, you have to advocate for that. And so I'm advocating for that.
And that's good, because we need it. Everyone's so worried about don't shake the hornet's nest, but like sometimes you just gotta, to see any kind of good change to come about it. So now that you've published a book, you're a published author, and you also write papers and you're working on your dissertation, do you feel that academics should have publicists?
Oh, like publicists and agents and stuff like that? Mm-hmm. So I actually have 2 articles coming out on this topic, small articles. One is on how I got my agent, and one is trade versus academic presses. These are articles geared towards academics. Like, should you publish in a trade versus academic press? And as an academic, do you need an agent? And I'd say most academics don't. First off, what's an agent? What's a publicist? Agents, if you want to publish in fiction or with a trade publisher. So trade publishers are like Penguin, Macmillan, Simon & Schuster. Academic publishers, University of California Press, Polity Press. If you want to publish with a trade publisher, you have to have an agent, because also they won't take your submission. They won't look at your manuscript. If you want to publish with the academic press, you don't need an agent at all, which is why most academics don't have agents and don't need one. If you want to publish as an academic because you want tenure, you probably don't need an agent. But if you're an academic who wants to write for the general public, or maybe you want to write a text that's like a crossover book, so maybe a little bit general public, general and academic, or maybe your books are just really famous. So I think some academics get agents after they write books. So an example might be Ruha Benjamin had an agent before or after she published her books. But say you're a Ruha Benjamin and you publish 3 books and they do really well, and then the agent's like, you're doing really good, I think you need me. Sometimes you acquire an agent that way as well. If an agent sees you are a high value investment. That's just an example. I have no idea how Ruha Benjamin got her agent. So I got an agent because I want to be a fiction author. I love to be a fiction author. I'm not. And I was searching for an agent to represent my fiction. And I reached out to Bookends Literary Agency. They have an awesome YouTube channel that's all about publishing. And I reached out to James McGowan and Jessica Faust, who run it. And in the email, I put that I published some articles that were nonfiction. And they were like, oh, we don't want to represent your fiction, but we love this nonfiction stuff you're doing. Long story short, James became my agent, and he was like, let's turn this into a career. And I was like, yeah, sure, absolutely. I always wanted to be a writer no matter what. And writing is such a huge thing for me. And so becoming an author of nonfiction for really the general public rather than just academic has become this thing for me. And so, Most academics won't need an agent, but if you hope to publish for the general public, you might consider looking into getting an agent. What's nice though nowadays is some academic presses, like MIT Press, they publish trade. Verso publishes trade too, right? So you're seeing more of these crossovers geared towards general audiences where you still don't need an agent. And then, when you get a publisher, you'll just kind of get a marketing team, a publicist, I have a salesperson too, like all those come with it. But yeah, that's sort of the beginning of it.
Yeah, and I was talking to another individual the other day. Her name's Elizabeth Bryety, and they had just released a new book, and they went with a regular publisher, not an academic publisher, because they said it takes so much longer to get an item approved by academic publishers. She's like, it could have been a year before this came out rather than a couple months. So I know that also is a factor of which way you're going, is how soon do you want this on the market?
Yeah, academic publishers as well. You typically don't have the same sort of port systems, marketing teams, and not because they're not amazing. It's just that they have less funding, they have less infrastructure. So I hear from a lot of my colleagues that they have less communication with their editor, less hands-on. There is less money with academic presses. Smaller advances, if any advance at all. When you work with an agent, it's going to be rare you don't get an advance because your agent's going to be like, we're not taking a deal where we don't get an advance, So those are differences too. But then when I got my book deal, I actually had to choose. I went to auction, and that means I had the choice between publishers. And so I had a choice between an academic press and then my current publisher, Chicago Review Press, which is a medium-sized independent press. And it was a big decision for me, not just because of all the reasons I already explained, where it was Chicago Review had the marketing team and they had my publicist in the sales, and they did offer me an advance. And I felt like they really shared my vision for the book as well. But with the academic press, it was a well-known academic press. And what comes with that, it comes with a really good career opportunity for a young scholar. My committee wanted me to go with the academic press. They were like, Savannah, you could get tenure straight off the bat. I mean, they were like, take the academic press offer. But, the academic press offered me no advance, really bad royalties. I was not going to make money on that book ever. They did have a good vision for my book. And it wasn't just about money. I've always imagined Ground Control as this book for the general public. And it was so hard to envision it going down an academic route. And that was tough for me. And, it's funny now as I worry, I'm like, when I'm applying to academic jobs right now, and I'm like, will they take it seriously because it's a trade publication? Right. Will an academic job even think, oh, she wrote a book, but it's a book for the public? It doesn't matter. Will it even matter on my CV? And this is, I talk about in this publication I have coming out, it's because we really value different types of publications differently and different types of presses differently, even, especially in academia. Yeah, and in the public. If someone says they self-publish something, you immediately are like, ew, you self-publish something. But I read a lot of romance novels and mystery, and 50% of romance novels are now self-published. And a lot of those self-published romance novels go on to be bestsellers that end up in Barnes & Noble, because Barnes & Noble will put anything in store that sells over so many copies. So I think there's a lot to think about here in the way we think about knowledge and value it.
No, I agree. If someone was to go into this field, what should they expect salary-wise?
Well, I think we should remember that being a space anthropologist is really just like any subfield of anthropology. So right now, for example, I've been a PhD student for the past 5 years. My salary was a PhD student salary, but as a space anthropologist, I have different sorts of career opportunities afforded to me. If I wanted to, I could probably get a job in the space industry. Maybe not after having written Ground Control, but maybe still, honestly. And jobs in the space industry, if you're in DC, you're gonna probably go in with 80 to 100,000 K. Working in policy, a lot of those jobs would probably, for me specifically, would probably be in policy. I'm not super interested in working in space anymore. I'm kind of actually I'm working on a book proposal that's on the history of apocalypse right now, branching out. I could also, with this career in writing I'm building, I'm applying to jobs in the publishing industry, starting off on the lower level, entry-level jobs. So entry-level publishing industry jobs are like $50K, depending on what city you're in. And it's like publishing assistant, editorial assistant. Then, there's faculty positions. We all can apply for, I'm about to have my PhD, applying for faculty positions. Depends on where you go. Could be anywhere from, 60K to 120K. Depending on what school you're at. And then I've also looked at museum curator positions. Again, depends on the city. So you're looking at like probably 70 to over 100K still. But, I'm on the market. And I think what's cool is I have, because of my research, opened the door to STEM fields as a humanities scholar and also policy, because my work specifically has been so focused on space policy, I could go into the policy field.
Okay. And as a woman in STEM, do you feel like you aren't always taken seriously? Because I know in your book you spoke how you kind of felt like you didn't conform to society's expectations of professionalism, because you've had different colored hair and you have tattoos.
Yeah, I definitely feel like a minority in the room because I'm a woman in STEM, but even more of a black sheep because of my field as an anthropologist. You do feel a little like you are explaining yourself and standing up for yourself constantly when you are at space events. I have this kind of silly scene at a happy hour where I explain to a guy who will go into the Space Force and be an executive in the Space Force one day, what my research is and what an anthropologist does. And I explained that in depth to him. And then he's like, cool, now what's the actual research? And he's, you're just like, yeah. And it's because he's looking for numbers. He's so used to working in a very, very quantitative field. Anything qualitative to him is just over his head. I think that made me stand out as a black sheep more than anything else, was just being a humanities person in the room. And I remember I would go into happy hours, and sometimes people come up and be like, oh, Savannah, I found someone who knows what anthropology is. And they drag me over and they'd be like, this person, they got their minor in anthropology. And I'd be like, hey, hi, and I'd chat with them for a while. That would happen a fair bit. Or someone would be like, anthropology was my favorite class in college. You'd get that a lot. But there's a lot of explaining myself. But as a woman, yeah. And definitely because of I think just DC is such a hyper-professional environment. I think you walk down the streets and no one gets out of their suit at the end of the day. I feel like you're all just hanging out and dress casual all the time. And you feel that sense of professionalism constantly, that it's the world of the little black dress in a way, and in the suit jacket. And that's very much not me. That's not my style in a personality wise. So I stood out in that way. But I met other people who did too over time. I just think that, especially because women are a true minority in the space industry, in the science and tech industry, there'd be 10% of us probably in one room, if not less. There is this sort of stark visibility of it in a room.
Yeah, we definitely need more women in science. But anyways, so for someone who's interested in getting in your field, or just the field of anthropology in general, what is the biggest piece of advice that you can give them? Or what is it a piece of advice that someone gave you that kind of set you on your course?
I think you have to be persistent and treat it seriously and not give up. When it comes to becoming an anthropologist or becoming a space anthropologist, I think a lot of people stop being an anthropologist even though they love their anthropology class in colleges because they think there are no careers in it. But I think all it takes is really making sure you do your research and having this strong awareness of what is going on in the anthropology community, who is doing what in the anthropology community, where are anthropologists at the time, and seeing that anthropologists are not just in academia and museums, they're all over the place. They're working in offices and at Google and for just companies all over the world. If you want to be a space anthropologist, then the career track is get an anthropology degree, probably go to grad school and focus on science and tech in some way, or focus on space. You don't have to get a doctorate, but I would say it's hard to specialize in anything as an anthropologist if you don't get at least a master's. When you're an undergrad, it's a little tough to specialize in anything because you're just kind of doing general anthropology. There are ways to specialize in things in undergrad, but you kind of have to do like at least like an honors thesis or something like that. Or like you can take your anthropology degree and maybe do internships afterwards. It's not impossible. I think you just have to have a drive for it. And then when it comes to being a writer, I feel like I just always took it very, very seriously. Ever since I was a kid, teenager, I mean, I was writing constantly. In undergrad, I went to Books A Million 3-4 days a week and I wrote just for fun. And then when I was in my master's degree, I went to Waterstones 3-4 days a week and I wrote just for fun. When I was writing manuscripts and they would get denied by agents and I would write a new manuscript and the old manuscript would go in the trash. And then I would start a new manuscript and it would go in the trash when it was denied, you know? And I think it was about as well, like a lot of intense self-editing and listening to your editors and being willing to like learn and recognize like this is not the manuscript that's going to be the winner and that's okay. And when it comes with nonfiction, same thing, like listening to your teachers and learning and waiting and being patient and putting yourself out there too. Like, I think that's important. Like I put myself out there young. In those first publications, I would not don't read them, you know, don't read them, you know, but read all the rest, you know. I have to treat it like a business these days and take it super seriously. It is a 9-to-5 job for me, writing just as much as school.
And so just to wrap up everything, like, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you would like to discuss?
One thing I like to say about Ground Control is it's as much a book about, you know, space exploration and this argument against human space exploration as it is a coming of age story of an anthropologist learning to work in STEM, which if you're really interested in that story and my story, that is in Ground Control. So you'll see it, you'll read it. The first section explicitly tells my story and like weaves it into this whole story about space. So you get both of that. And yeah, and thank you all for listening. Thank you, Abby, for having me. That's all. Thank Abby for starting this podcast.
Yeah, of course. And so where can listeners learn more about you and your work?
I have a website. It's www.savannahmandel.com. You can Google me and I pop up pretty easy. You can also find me I'm very active on LinkedIn. I also have a Twitter and an Instagram, which all those are linked on my website as well.
Perfect. Alrighty. Well, thank you so much for coming on. And if you ever in the future like post any new books, I'd love to have you on again.
Of course. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Anthropuzzled. This show was produced by me. A special thanks to Cheyenne Brewer for editing the website and episode descriptions, and to Leah Akers for the incredible logo design. The music is courtesy of Chad Crouch, aka Poddington Bear of Sound of Picture. If you have any questions, you can reach me at abby.letzinger@anthropuzzle.com. That's abby.letzinger@anthropuzzle.com. Or as Anthropuzzled on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Reddit, and TikTok. Until next time.